approve?
Yeah.
Anyways, if all my judges are ready, my timer. Let's get started. 6 million dead. This is the number of Jews who were murdered during the Holocaust. When you look at the Nazi government a few years before the Holocaust, you can see a very obvious slippery slope leading to the termination of the Jews. It is reported that the National German government made over 25 laws to diminish the rights and ways of living of the Jews, but not just that, but countless more were made on the state level. A common expression used to remind us not to repeat the Nazis' same slippery slope is never forget. However, this slippery slope is happening again today regarding the laws of killing innocent children. I'm not going to talk about killing inside the womb, but when they kill outside the womb, known only as infanticide. I'll be explaining this concept with 3 big questions today. 1, what is infanticide? 2, when is a baby a human? And finally, is it murder? So, to start off, what is infanticide? Simply put, infanticide is the practice of killing unwanted babies within the first year of their life. This word was first introduced in the 17th century and is derived from the word infanticidium. Infanticide was used to describe the practice of abandoning or killing children shortly after birth. The earliest recorded case of intentional murder shortly after birth was around 300 BC. Now, I have always liked to use analogies to make more complex concepts simple. So let's look at infanticide this way. Think about a beautiful flower and its respective seed. Take that seed and plant it in the dirt. You take care of the little green sprout coming out of the ground, watering it and making sure it has the things it needs to become a beautiful flower. It doesn't look much like a flower, but after a while, the little green sprout turns into a little flower. You don't like how it turns out, so you either leave it to just fend for itself or uproot it and plant a new one in hopes you like this next flower better. With infanticide, mothers will carry a child for 9 months in their anticipation of their little flower. But once their young little flower blooms, they decide they don't like it for one reason or another and kill it. This is very clearly an evil and wicked practice. Now, this is, shockingly, many states have already made or are proposing no legal actions for killing babies who survive abortions. Some of those states being Alaska, Colorado, Hawaii, and Idaho. Believe it or not, there are 15 more additional states that are making similar laws to this. These laws are just the tip of a very slippery slope. LifeNews.com stated that Maryland has tried to legalize doing nothing for a child whose long-term prospects aren't good. California is farther down on the slope by legalizing infanticide entirely. Being the flagship for this despicable act, California made it legal to kill your child up to 28 days after birth last June of 2022. This slippery slope should scare us and incite us to make changes in our clearly skewed governmental system. Now that we have a general grasp on what infanticide is and why it is so clearly wrong, we can talk about when is a baby a human? This question has a wide range of responses to it, from once the egg is fertilized all the way to birth. I personally, as a Bible-believing person, would say that a baby is a baby as soon as the egg is fertilized. However, others believe that a baby still isn't a baby even after the first 28 days after it is out of the womb. This belief is just straight up twisted. Let me explain, continuing with our flower analogy. When you have the little green sprout coming out of the ground, it doesn't look much like a flower, but we all know it is in fact a flower. However, once the flower actually blooms, you have undisputable evidence that it is obvious that it is a flower. Remember that California legalized the killing of that tiny flower? Well, this law is giving women a loophole through which they can still abort without aborting. Whenever the state government makes a loophole to avoid a national law, it is usually just making a bad law worse, which is clearly the case here. Back to when is a baby a baby. I have yet to hear a valid argument on why a baby isn't a baby as soon as the egg is fertilized. It's always an opinion like 24 weeks, or once there's a bump on the stomach, or when you can hear the heartbeat. My question to them is always, how is that up to you to decide? Or why is that a defining characteristic of what a human is? And the response is usually just, my thought is that no one will ever able to respond that it's not a human as soon as it's fertilized because it's just not true. You can't dispute a fact logically, period. So now that we have the most logical time a baby is a human and we understand infanticide better, we can move on to my third and final question. So, is it murder? My first response is, wow, the fact that we even need to verbalize this question. Going back to my analogies, let me ask you a couple more questions. If I gave my friend a poison soup and they eat it, is that murder? If I gave a loaded gun to my 5-year-old brother when he's playing with his siblings and one of them gets shot, is that murder? Or if I remove a critical support from a suspension bridge and someone falls to their death, is that murder? Oxford Dictionary defines murder as, quote, the unlawful premeditated killing of one human being by another, end quote. To break this down, I'm going to focus on 3 words: unlawful, premeditated, and human. Murdering someone is unlawful any way you look at it. There is no way that if one person murders another, whether it be intentional or not, that anyone in their right mind can justify it. Now, premeditated means that someone thought about what they were doing before they were going to do it. This is always the case when it comes to infanticide, because whoever is murdering this child will have to think about it beforehand. Because the concept of infanticide includes getting rid of unwanted children, this means that they will have to be doing it intentionally. Now, the third and finally, and the most important word in that definition is human. Princeton University says this about when a human should be considered human. Quote, the fusion of sperm and the egg at fertilization results in a live human being, a single-celled human, end quote. This clearly shows us that not only is abortion clearly murder, but if you still can't wrap your head around that, infanticide is literally just one person killing another. So, to sum up my questions today, what is infanticide? Infanticide is the killing of a child outside of the womb. When is a baby a baby? A human child is a child at the point of conception. And finally, the most ridiculous question that somehow still needs to be asked. Is it murder? Yes. Yes, it is. It is literally murder to take that child's life at any stage. Remember our slippery slope from the beginning of our speech? We can see how a similar thing happened back in the 1930s with the Jews and Germans. And we remember the slogan to remind everyone that this atrocity should never be repeated. So I say to you, never forget.